All right, so picking up right where we left off, remember we're looking at these three different tables. In blue, we have our fact or data table that contains order quantities broken down by day and by product ID. In green, we have our calendar lookup or dimension table. And in orange, we have our product lookup table. And we talked about how there are some shared columns between these three tables that will eventually allow us to connect or relate them together. And while technically they're all considered key columns, there are two different types of keys that are really important to understand. In our fact table, the data and product ID columns are known as foreign keys, sometimes marked with an FK. Now, what's important to understand about foreign keys is that they can contain multiple instances of each value, and they relate to the primary keys in our dimension tables. And that makes sense, right? If we're looking at transactions, it's very likely that we're going to have multiple transactions on a given date, right? If we're running a viable business, that would be expected. And we're also expected to see multiple transactions for a given product or product ID. So both those columns, date and product ID, are likely to contain duplicate values. In our dimension tables, those date and product ID columns are known as primary keys, or PKs. Primary keys uniquely identify each row or record in the table. In other words, there are no duplicates, and they relate to foreign keys in our fact tables. And that's what forms the basis of our table relationships. So for any Excel users out there who are familiar with lookup functions like VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, or index and match, you can think of foreign keys almost like your lookup values and primary keys as your lookup arrays. Because with the data model, what's essentially happening is that you're looking for matching values in those primary key columns, and you're retrieving related information from elsewhere in those tables. It's the same exact concept, except we're achieving it through relationships instead of formulas and functions. So with that, let's jump back into Power BI. Let's pull up our model view, talk about each of the tables that we've loaded in, and see if we can identify our primary and foreign keys. All right, so go ahead and open up your AdventureWorks report and follow along. What we're going to do is jump into our model view. This is where we'll spend a ton of time in this section because it's where the relational data modeling magic actually takes place. So it's a little bit tough to read here, so I'm going to zoom in a bit down here in the lower right. 80% looks good. We can collapse these panes for now. And remember, these are the tables that we've loaded into our model. And in fact, we don't actually have a model yet. We just have a collection of independent tables. So let's think about these topics we've been talking about: normalization, primary and foreign keys, and fact and dimension tables, and start to identify some of these things here inside of our report. So the first thing I want to do is actually just grab my fact table, right, my sales data, which contains those quantities sold, and pull it down beneath my lookup or dimension tables. We'll talk a little bit more about how to organize your models, different model schemas or layouts in a little bit, but for now I just want to create that visual distinction. So as we think about this concept of normalization, remember that one of the key things about normalized data models is that each table serves a distinct and specific purpose. And I think we're in good shape here, right? Because we have a territory lookup that contains information about certain territory keys like the region, country, and continent. We've got a product table that contains all sorts of information about products. Note that we don't see anything like transactions or quantities sold mixed in here. This table is purely designed to provide product-specific attributes, which is what you're looking for in a dimension table. Same story with product categories. We've got category names and subcategory names here as well. Our customer lookup table contains information or attributes about individual customers, looks like based on a customer key. And our calendar lookup is pretty straightforward. We've got rows or records representing each date, and then different time or calendar fields based on those dates. So from a normalization standpoint, everything's looking good here. One thing I want to do is just kind of drag to rearrange these tables a little bit. We're going to do some special stuff with our product specific tables. So I'm going to pull these all over to one side. And I'm going to bring territory, customer, and calendar lookups right over here. So you don't have to make it exact. Don't worry too much. Just kind of rearranging things just a little bit. Now, next up, one thing that Power BI allows us to do is actually create a little visual indicator to mark the primary keys in each table. So let's go through that exercise and mark our primary keys, starting with our territory lookup. Now, there are a couple ways to do it. If you know the table, if you're familiar with the data, you can do it right here in the model view. I'm actually going to select the table, drill into the properties pane, and right here there's a drop down for key column. I can select sales territory key like so. And what that's going to do is pop on this little visual indicator. It almost looks like an ID card or a license right there next to the field name. Now, if you're not quite sure what the primary key is, you can jump into the data view as well, and that's going to actually show the rows and columns and the values contained within your tables, and you can use that to help identify which column uniquely identifies each record. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward. We know what they are, so follow along and let's continue marking each of those primary keys. So for customers, it's going to be our customer key. So let's go ahead and select that customer table, and we'll mark customer key here in the properties pane. That looks good. Calendar table, remember each record is based on a date. Whoops, got to select that table first. So date is our primary key for a calendar. And then we've got keys in each of our product tables as well. This is going to be our product key in our product lookup table. And the product category table, we've got a product category key. And finally, in our subcategory table, we have a product subcategory key. So that all looks good. I think we've addressed everything in our dimension tables. And now thinking about our data or fact table, our sales data table here, sometimes you may see a sales ID or a transaction ID that does uniquely identify each record in a data table. In this case, we don't have that. We only have foreign keys inside of our sales data table. Because remember, we may have multiple orders or instances associated with a given customer, product, territory, or date. So we don't have any primary keys to mark here in our sales data table. So that's a good breakpoint for now. Let's go ahead and save our file. And next up, we're going to start talking a little bit more about these table relationships and how to create them to configure our data model.